Ukraine will still receive Patriot interceptor missiles under a new deal with Washington, and Turkey is selling ATACMS missiles to Ukraine for the first time. Rockets and artillery systems through a deal with the United States. But to achieve this, Ukraine is forced to take unpopular steps. Today, August 8, several news stories have come together to form one big picture of the compromises Ukraine is making for the sake of weapons and security guarantees. Volodymyr Zelensky announced today that he has finally reached an agreement with the United States of America on monthly deliveries of missiles for the Patriot systems. That is, not one big package of 300 missiles for the whole winter, but separate deliveries every month. On the same day, it emerged that Ukraine is buying at least 70 ATACMS ballistic missiles and 12 M270 launchers from Turkey. But that's not all. It also includes hundreds of other munitions. And literally at the same time, it turned out that Ukraine agreed not to attack non-Russian ships at the oil terminal in Novorossiysk. And Turkey itself partially blocked passage through the Dardanelles. So let's break down this whole set of news together in this episode and analyze why everything is happening this way. Because on the one hand, we see that Turkey is directly supplying weapons to Ukraine. But on the other hand, Ukraine is still making certain concessions regarding attacks on Novorossiysk, where we had quite significant successes. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's figure out these topics together. But before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving toward the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I'd be grateful for every subscription. Right now, check under this video to see if you are subscribed. If not, click it right now. Continued. So, let's start with the main news of the day, the statement by Volodymyr Zelensky about the Patriot interceptor missiles. At a press conference with the president of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, in Belgrade, Zelensky stated, quote, "Who possesses interceptor missiles and systems? First of all, their manufacturer is the United States of America. Can they help? We are working on it. Will they supply us with missiles every month? Yes. We have the relevant agreements." At the same time, Zelensky immediately emphasized that these supplies are still not enough for full protection against all Russian ballistic attacks. And this year their volume is less than it was before. Washington, by the way, has not commented on this statement yet, but it sounds encouraging. That is, Zelensky claims that there is supposedly a direct agreement with Washington that every month there will still be certain deliveries of Patriot interceptor missiles. But to understand the real value of this statement, it's important to know the context, because earlier, US President Donald Trump stated that the Patriot missiles are needed by the United States themselves. Because of the war against Iran, American stockpiles of such missiles have been significantly reduced. That is, Zelensky is supposedly announcing a victory in the negotiations and some kind of agreement, especially since just the day before, the American president basically confirmed the refusal to provide long-range missiles, citing the United States' own needs. In recent weeks, Zelensky has repeatedly called on allies to provide Kyiv with additional air defense missiles to repel Russian strikes on cities, and has stated that there is an acute shortage of such air defense assets, because of which the armed forces of Ukraine, unfortunately, are unable to shoot down a single Russian ballistic missile. In the past 10 days, Russian forces have carried out at least 4 massive missile and drone strikes on Kyiv and the Kyiv region, as a result of which several dozen civilians were killed and wounded. But as you know, unfortunately, Kyiv wasn't the only place they struck, and on the night of August 8, the Ukrainian armed forces again failed to shoot down a single Russian ballistic missile. And now it's also telling where else Zelensky is turning for help in getting interceptor missiles besides the United States. The thing is, on Saturday he stated that Kyiv would like to get air defense systems from Israel, and then his quote, "We would be ready to acquire them, that is, to buy them. For now, we don't have that opportunity, although we are holding such negotiations." This was said in the context of American media having confirmed it the day before, that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, had blocked the transfer of air defense systems to Ukraine back in 2023, the Iron Dome. Well, as you know, at the end of July, when both Zelensky and Netanyahu were together in Washington, Netanyahu for some reason refused a personal meeting. There was only a meeting at the funeral. Lindsey Graham, the same senator who is pushing the idea of hellish sanctions against Russia. And there, that meeting looked quite tense and it was rather short. And by the way, since we've already mentioned Lindsey Graham, I have to say that the US Senate has finally voted for those very harsh sanctions against Russia, which have been pushed for all these past years by Lindsey Graham and his colleague, Democrat Richard Blumenthal. And now this package has to be voted on in the House of Representatives. After that, this bill goes to President Donald Trump for his signature. And after that, Trump will have leverage in the form of rather tough sanctions against Russia. Well, in particular against third countries that continue to buy oil, gas, and other energy resources from the unwashed Russians. And I'll note that Iran was also included in this same sanctions package, meaning Trump pushed for this so that tariffs could be imposed in one package against everyone who continues to cooperate with both Russia and Iran. Separately, Volodymyr Zelensky explained in detail today exactly where the focus of the search for interceptor missiles is shifting, particularly to Europe. He says, "We understand the realities very well." Here is his quote: "The second issue is Europe. Who has interceptor missiles? The Germans have them, the Poles have them. These are the ones who can really help. With all due respect and gratitude to the German side, they have helped, and Poland has helped as well. But we are talking about who can provide the missiles right now. I'm telling you honestly, every day I talk to one European country or another so that Ukraine can get additional missiles besides the American package. And it's worth noting here that yes, European countries do have interceptor missiles for the Patriot systems. And let me remind you, a couple of months ago even Donald Trump addressed the Europeans and said, look, you have these PAC-3 missiles, so why aren't you giving them to Ukraine? He said, the war is happening in Europe, so you should defend Europe yourselves. But the Europeans are afraid to send these missiles, fearing that they will be left without protection themselves. And America won't be able to make up for their shortage anymore. And here, Zelensky made a statement that sounds almost like a reproach towards the entire Western bureaucracy over the past years of the war. He reminded, or rather he confirmed, that yes indeed this is what we discussed with you in previous episodes, that in the first year of the full-scale war, Ukraine really did ask then US President Joe Biden to grant Ukraine licenses to produce Patriot interceptor missiles. But the US refused at that time. And now a quote from Zelensky. If we had received those licenses back then, we would already be producing Patriot missiles for everyone, including Europe. But now we're dealing with paperwork. But what's flying at us are not papers, but real missiles that kill people. It's not just Americans who should be dealing with this, but Europeans as well. We're also taking a long time to resolve the licensing issue with them. Now, the second part, if I can put it that way, of today's arms deal concerns Turkey. According to reports from the United States Department of State, Ukraine is officially purchasing 70 M39 ATACMS ballistic missiles and 12 M270 launchers from Turkey. Right now, the deal is going through the procedure of re-export approval for American weapons via the US Congress. Well, at least formally. They're Turkish because they were already bought from the Americans. But since it's an American development, any resale to a third country requires bureaucratic approval from Washington. But the point is clear. It was the United States of America that initiated this sale as part of such a program. Like, let's find where else in the world these missiles exist. And if Turkey doesn't need them, then let it sell them to Ukraine. In addition to this main package that I mentioned, Ukraine Ukraine should also receive from Turkey a little more than 2,500 M26 rockets with cluster warheads and 47,200 3mm cluster shells for the 2S-7 Pion self-propelled artillery system. I think you understand what I'm talking about. The transfer is planned to begin after the notification review period by Congress is completed, so only some formal paperwork remains, and Turkey is transferring all these weapons to Ukraine. The meaning of the deal is completely transparent for both sides. This way, Turkey is reducing its stockpiles of objectively outdated weapons, and Ukraine is strengthening its long-range fire support. As for the M39 ATACMS missile itself, it's an earlier version of this missile with a range of about 165 kilometers. It carries a cluster warhead weighing 560 kilograms with almost 1,000 M74 submunitions. And it's designed to target personnel and unarmored vehicles, air defense systems, and other area targets. So, as you can imagine, this is quite a serious cluster munition. But, right away you get the feeling that such cooperation with Turkey must come at a price. So, according to Bloomberg, Ukraine agreed not to strike certain non-Russian oil tankers and Black Sea infrastructure, which are critical for the export of Kazakh oil. Kyiv has set up contact points so that commercial carriers can exchange information and ensure the safe passage of their vessels. The agreement reportedly was reached after a meeting between senior US government officials and the leadership of Ukraine. And it is potentially an important step toward increasing oil flows in the region, but not Russian oil, I emphasize. This happened after a series of recent attacks on ships near the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal in Novorossiysk. Russia led to reduced activity there, and as you know, Kazakhstan was forced to reduce its oil production volumes. The CPC terminal of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium is crucial for supplying Kazakh oil to the global market, since Kazakhstan does not have significant capacity to export via alternative routes. There are alternative routes, but let's put it this way, they are insufficient. And against this background, it should be noted that about 2% of the world's crude oil supplies pass through the CPC. And European oil refineries depend on the supply volumes specifically from this region. And against this background, we have another very interesting and encouraging piece of news, so that, we don't start saying that, as they say, some kind of betrayal took place amid all this. The fact is, it's already obvious that the Americans will still try to turn this entire region away from Russia as much as possible. And here's some related news. Today, it was reported that the United States of America announced the launch of the Trans-Caspian Entrepreneurship Development Fund for a little more than $200 million for the South Caucasus and Central Asia. A statement appeared on the State Department's website, which says that the initial capital of the fund will be exactly $201 million. The US government will allocate these funds to stimulate private sector investment along the Trans-Caspian trade route. The US also announced the continuation of a project called the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, which involves the modernization of the railway, road, energy, and digital infrastructure in Armenia and the region. By the way, today Pashinyan had a phone call with Donald Trump. And now, engineering surveys for the construction of the railway have already begun in Armenia. And Azerbaijan is close to completing the construction of the road and rail lines that will be connected to Armenia. So, Why am I saying this? I'm saying that on the anniversary, yes, of the signing of the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, it's already obvious that Armenia is moving towards the west and Azerbaijan is heading there as well. Ukraine's cooperation with Turkey highlights that Turkey as well. Turkey is increasingly shifting in this direction. Therefore, it's obvious that Kazakhstan will also gradually be lured in the same way, considering that it is specifically an American oil company that is helping Kazakhstan extract Kazakh oil. Now, let's get back to the CPC. According to the agreement reached with US mediation, Ukraine has committed to refrain from attacking CPC infrastructure and non-Russian vessels. Next to the terminal in Novorossiysk. Kyiv also provides shippers with instructions clarifying exactly which vessels are subject to attacks. Provided the agreement is followed, such vessels cannot be subject to Ukrainian sanctions and should not transport Russian oil or other cargo, even remotely connected to the unwashed Russians. They should not, in any way, that is, they cannot belong to Russian individuals or legal entities. Basically, if the oil is Kazakh, if the tanker is not Russian, not connected in any way at all with the wild Russians, Ukraine will not attack it. To hell with it. Let it load in Novorossiysk and transport Kazakh oil. And the last element of this chain is what Turkey itself did just today. Turkish authorities have begun restricting commercial vessel movement through the Dardanelles Strait toward the Black Sea. These measures were taken due to the increased Russian and Ukrainian attacks on civilian vessels in the Black Sea basin. And this is also an interesting episode. The Turkish Directorate General of Coastal Safety has notified several vessels heading specifically to Novorossiysk that it is currently not issuing transit permits for such voyages, or that it needs more time to review applications for passage through the strait. In short, Turkey is helping to partially reduce the flow of vessels to Novorossiysk. The reason was a specific incident. Just this past Tuesday, 2 vessels connected to Turkey came under attack in the Black Sea, traveling from Samsun, Turkey to Novorossiysk with a cargo of vegetables and fruits. Several sailors were injured, and after that, the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs officially called on Russia and Ukraine to urgently take concrete measures to ensure the safety of navigation in the Black Sea. But against this background, Bloomberg notes that the measures taken by Turkey may create new difficulties for global trade. In a situation where oil supplies have already been significantly disrupted due to the war in Iran and the reduction of shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. The intensification of Russian and Ukrainian attacks also negatively affects the transportation of grain from the Black Sea region. This has already led to a rise in global wheat prices in July to a 2-year high. So, when Russians rejoice over the strikes on Odessa ports, they should remember that if Ukraine really wants to, it can completely shut down all exports from Russia. But since our partners are asking, now we will only strike Russian vessels. The result. Today, on August 8, Zelensky announces an agreement with the US for monthly deliveries of missiles for Patriot systems. Ukraine is buying outdated ATACMS missiles and M270 launchers from Turkey, among other things. At the same time, it turns out that for the expansion of supplies and in general for the normalization of Black Sea trade, Ukraine paid with a specific concession, the obligation not to attack non-Russian ships at the terminal of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium in Novorossiysk, which is critically important for Kazakh oil. And as for Turkey itself, the third party in this whole arrangement, on the same day it partially closes the Dardanelles to ships heading to Russia and partially to those going to Ukraine due to the increase in attacks on civilian vessels. And so, on one hand, Ukraine is getting much broader access to weapons through several channels at once. That includes American Patriot systems, and there are also Turkish ATACMS missiles. But on the other hand, this expansion comes at the cost of restrictions on its own military campaign in the Black Sea. That is, in the area where Ukraine has been most effectively putting pressure on Russian maritime logistics in recent months. Well, Turkey's restriction on passage through the Dardanelles shows that the very intensity of the naval war in the Black Sea is already starting to create problems not only for the directly warring parties, but also for third countries and their commercial shipping. In general, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.